everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most interesting and important news coming out of the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. To our loyal listeners and viewers, welcome back. Help us spread the word about this podcast. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Lee. I am the managing director at Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at autoinsights.substack.com, which of course, I encourage you all to do. Lei, congratulations on episode number 250. We are celebrating 250 today. I think we've actually done more than 250 episodes, but for all intents and purposes, we're at 250. That's a huge milestone. Huge milestone. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Good morning. This is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. Yes, and this is the big 250 episode.
Non-extravaganza episode. Non-extravaganza, because we didn't really prepare anything special.
So this is a big year. America is celebrating its 250th birthday in 3 weeks.
And we are at 250.
We're at 250. The World Cup is going on. I mean, it's the biggest and the grandest event in the world. I'm sure you're watching. I'm watching. Congratulations to the Korean team, our Asian brothers, winning yesterday. BYD has some big plans. We can talk about that. Auto sales in China, it's still big in terms of penetrations of NEVs are rising significantly, but the domestic market is shrinking. So that's the only thing that's not big. But there's been a lot of big things going on. SpaceX is IPOing in 25 minutes.
Elon will become the first trillion world. Quick story about South Korea. My son has a good buddy named Dohan, 8th grade. They both just graduated from middle school. And my wife saw him crying a little bit at the graduation event. They call it a clap out. They don't call it graduation. Come to find that his dad, who's transferred from Seoul for his company, he wanted to get an extension. Dohan wanted to stay. Couldn't stay, so they're moving back. So as a going away, they had a sleepover at a buddy's last night, and they all watched the South Korea game in kind of support of him. So I thought that was cool. But one of the things that I'll talk about today, Lei, after we've gotten through BYD's enormous, bold, outwardly facing goals, a discussion about that is that I went to the GM Empower event, and there's been some news about that. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But why don't we start with the challenges in the China market that you a little bit earlier?
The big number that's been reported is 20% year-on-year sales drop. So another way to look at it is domestically, or if you want to look at the overall sales, it's basically selling the same number of vehicles in the first 5 months as they did in the first 4 months of last year. That's kind of how you put it. So, and the other one was the drop in absolute sales. More than 80% were accounted by ICE EVs, so the traditional internal combustion engines. At the same time, we're seeing the penetration go into the 60s. So there's no turning back in terms of what people are buying. NEVs, and also exporting now, the share of NEVs of the vehicles exported are still below 50%, but they're growing much faster than the ICE EV export. So those are some of the peeling of the onions of the numbers.
Let me add to that, because this is the 8th consecutive month that sales have slowed. So the domestic market, and part of it is due to some of the subsidies going away. The Chinese government pulled some of the subsidies earlier this year. But also, to your point, Lei, it indicates that, number one, the denominator is much larger. So we're seeing NEVs really take control of the entire Chinese market. And it's an indicator that the incentives do matter from the Chinese government, and that the overall economy, with the real estate market still struggling a bit, is weighing on consumer buying.
But at the same time, NIO is a good example. They launched the Envoy L60 yesterday. That's probably their last major model launch of this year. And the rest of the way, all they have to do is just sell, deliver. And in the month of June, we're possibly looking at the ES9 and the ES8. Both getting to 10,000 in a single month. That's unprecedented for NIO and also for the industry, considering the price points they're at, given the backdrop that the domestic market is stalling or falling. So there's these anomalies at the same time.
The other thing that I think would be interesting to watch for all you NIO stands out there, Geely stands, Zeekr stands, the competition between the Ito 8, the NIO ES8, and the Zeekr 8X is going to intensify over the next several months. In May, Zeekr 8X won that crown. They sold 6,000 units, but it's going to be an intense competition because, to your point, Lei, ES8 is likely going to get to 10,000 units pretty soon. So what does that mean for the 8X, and what does that mean for the M8? The M8 is the oldest of the three, I think, although it did get a refresh recently. But the 8X has been out for a little bit now, a few months, and the ES8 was refreshed recently as well. The ES8, to me, set the standard, but it seems like the 8X has some resilience. So keep an eye on that three-headed competition, because that'll kind of give a good indication of whether or not NIO is going to have a strong 2026 or finish to 2026.
It looks like, given the current momentum, they should be finishing strong. And then the other number I just remembered, for 2 consecutive months, over 900,000 vehicles exported.
So I know you had mentioned that it's still less than 50, but I thought in the month of May, 54% clean energy vehicles versus 46% ICE vehicles were exported. And in May, the year-over-year growth of exports was over 100%.
Yeah, so basically that's mind-boggling, because just 6 years ago, I think 2020 or 2021, China exported 1 million vehicles. And now we're exporting nearly 1 million a month.
We'll be over 10 million by the end of 2026.
That's pretty significant. And I think the narrative is that all of these car makers, they're exporting because of capacity, because of this domestic pressure at home. And it's always hard to look at it positively or negatively. We can debate on that. But I've always thought many years that even in the late 2010s, I've never thought the China market was ever going to go above 30 million. Even there's talk about the ownership per 1,000 people was way below the US or the mature market standards.
Europe, yeah.
Now we're seeing the export market of 25 million, 30 million. At least a third are exported. Should that be surprising? Given the geopolitical backdrop, global geopolitics, there's demand of these Chinese EVs, that some markets are opening up, that they're building plants outside of China.
Case in point, Brazil, or Geely started building the Xingyuan in Brazil earlier this week or last week. The Xingyuan is the most popular mass market EV in China. Last year, it sold about 500,000 units, and second only to the Model Y in China. So it's a very popular product, and I think it's going to continue to win hearts and minds in Latin America. And building domestically is a huge win for Geely. And we hear this narrative that the Chinese are going to ship their expensive cars abroad. And that's not really the case. It's important also is that the BYD Dolphin, which was specifically designed for the European market, is going to land later this year in the EU, and it's going to come in at around 30,000 euro or 29,000 euro, 33,000 US dollars. So they're really continuing to be aggressive, and they really want that low end of the market. Now, will they also look at exporting cars like the ES8, the M8, the 8X? Of course they will. But at the end of the day, there is obviously some truth to the overcapacity issue, the pressure on sales in the domestic market, and the weakening of sales potentially for a lot of automakers, including BYD has been struggling. Part of that is because of competition, but the other part has been because the market has cooled off quite a bit. And so this dovetails into What did Wang Chuanfu say this week, Lei?
We want to be number one.
Let's set the table. Well, where was he at? What was he doing? What event was he at?
So earlier this week, BYD had their annual general meeting, and Wang Chuanfu spoke to their shareholders, investors, and one of the biggest things he blurted out was, we're going to be number one in 2030. Globally. And it's not something that he's said before that carried significant weight. It was back in 2007 when he said BYD will be number one in China by 2015 and number one globally by 2025. Something along the lines of that. And BYD achieved it much ahead of time. In NEVs, obviously they're still behind the big players, Volkswagen, Toyota, but they were number 6 last year in global sales. So they want to be number one by 2030. That's the biggest kind of bomb that he dropped. Something not surprising to us, he always had the potential or wanted to get to number one. That was their goal for quite some time. But in order to get
it seems very, very aggressive.
There's a few questions that we need to look at. First of all, do they need to even get to 10 million to be number one? That's the first question. And second...
Well, first of all, Lei, Toyota last year was closer to 11. So
10 million would be a good benchmark that they need to get, which means they have to double sales. From this year, I'm thinking they might get to close to 5 million. Last year was 4.6. Doubling in 4 years is crazy. And then the other question is where they are this year. The other thing that Wang Chuanfu said, they expect to sell more than 1.6 million outside of China. So that's roughly a third of sales, total sales expected. By 2030, Stella Li has said this on the record that they want to be 50-50 domestic sales versus overseas. So the other question is it easier to get to 5 million at home, or is it easier to get to 5 million outside of China? Or it's both not easy.
I've become less bullish. Do I still think they have an opportunity to be the number one automaker in the world? Yes, I do. Do I think that's going to happen by 2030? No, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if
we should make a bet.
Do you think it's going to be by 2030?
I'm willing to bet they can't get to number one by 2030.
So there's an important caveat because Jojo EX6BI just wrote this in the chat. It's a mighty hill to climb. Yeah, exactly. I think there are a number of asterisks. So I don't know if BYD is going to be able to export 5 million vehicles from China. Now, they do have factories opening up and already open. They have CKD and full manufacturing coming online in the next several years, but it's not going to be 3-4 million units, okay? And we always have to remember that their level of complexity increases exponentially as they ship more vehicles outside of China, number one. Number two, build more vehicles outside of China because it's not just final assembly and manufacturing. They also have to figure out what they're going to do with battery production. Do they do assembly of passenger vehicles in Hungary, in India, in Thailand, and ship cells from China? Or are they going to be forced to build cells locally as well? And these are all open questions. And we see that BYD, I think, also appreciates now how well managed Toyota is to get to 11 million units.
No, something that just thought of that was very important, very interesting. And Wang Chuanfu mentioned it. How do you spell BYD? You spell a battery. For someone who spells as a battery maker, they're facing constraints in their ramping of the second-gen blade battery production. That's the other thing Wang Chuanfu talked about. And he said ramping is increasing at about 20,000 to 30,000 units per month in the coming months. So they're constrained by batteries. And what Li Bin said just earlier today or yesterday in an interview that the Envoy L60, the cost went up by 10,000 RMB because of the raw materials, because of the memory chips. So all of these are going up while BYD is facing this constraint in the battery. If that gets solved, okay, so they should be better off this year. And the other thing was, I saw your tweet about they're investing 2 billion euros for 3,000 flash charging stations. It was reported by FT by 2027. So these are small things that they're doing to support that 10 million target. So there's tactics, there's strategy. They're trying to execute on those. And those will be the question marks that if they're answered correctly, then they have a good path to 10 million.
Right. And ultimately, the question needs to be as well, when we're talking and looking at strategy, does BYD need to eventually outsource some of their battery production to CATL or Gotion to get to that 11? Because remember, it's 11 million units, not 10 million. Because I don't see Toyota losing ground from a vehicle sales standpoint significantly over the next 4 years. And the pathway to 11 million units, I think you and I are in agreement that it doesn't happen without the U.S. market. And they're not in the U.S. market yet. If best case scenario, they enter by 2027, they probably need to sell 2 million units in the U.S. market alone. Right. To get to 11 million, right? 4.6. Remember, think of it this way. We have to sell 5 million in China, 5 million outside of China. They're exporting like 1.6 right now. Okay. And let's say production outside of China is fairly insignificant. So let's say around 2 million right now. Okay. Exports and non-Chinese sales. That means they need to get to 5 million at least. And this is based on what Stella Lee is telling us, right? They can get to 11 million by selling many, many more in China over the next 3 years. That, I think, is more controllable than assuming that they could get to 5 million units out, 5.5 million units outside of China. I think because currently, I don't think they have capacity in the battery side or the vehicle production side to get to 11 million units. Build factories.
Those are the wrinkles. And the 2 million you mentioned happening in US by 2030, I don't see that happening.
Yeah, that's not happening. But realistically, if they enter by 2027, Lei, realistically, how many do you think they could sell by 2030?
Hundreds of thousands of units are okay, but 2 million can't think of that. I know
in my opinion, let's not use 2030 as the date. Let's just say open-ended. If they're to become the number one vehicle maker in the world, I think, let's say it's a 12 million unit number, and that can be over 10 years, right? It doesn't have to be 2030. I think the U.S. market probably needs to be 25% of their market at least.
That's pretty high. Yeah, it's pretty high. A quarter. Wow. Okay. I haven't thought about that kind of the breakdown, but yeah.
Because for Toyota, the U.S. market is so important, right? I don't have that breakdown, percentage of sales of the U.S. market for Toyota, but, I'll do that homework myself because it could rely on the emerging markets, right? But the politics of emerging markets is pretty complicated as opposed to trying to enter North America with the USMCA intact so they could ship from Canada to the U.S. and Mexico tariff-free and vice versa. So
I think Trump just said he doesn't want the USMCA anymore, something like that.
Well, I talked to a couple of Canadian folks this week, and they're like, yeah, we don't see the USMCA going away.
Okay. All right.
Trump would prefer bilateral agreements for sure, because that helps control the free trade and really would lock in the Chinese into building in the United States if they wanted access to the U.S. market. With the current language of the USMCA, Chinese could build in Canada and ship to the United States. Technically, would Trump administration stop that? Yes, they would. But from a letter of the law, in the current language of the USMCA, the Chinese could ship to the United States, I believe, technically, and to Mexico from Canada. So, now, but let me ask you this before we move on. Why do you think Wang Chuanfu needed to say all these things?
Why does Elon Musk say things? No, I mean, obviously, it's to give confidence to the investors and shareholders.
Right.
That they've had some rough patch of stretch. I think they're still kind of trying to overcome that. Sales are coming back slowly. We're going to see 400,000 level most likely in June and later in the year. Not surprised if they can get back to 500,000 a month, which they got to at the end of 24, I think.
One thing that I think is really important to remember as well, Lei, is that we talk like BYD will eventually, it's like a done deal. 2030 might not be the date, but it seems like a done deal. And it's not. I want to emphasize that you and I are just talking best case scenario for BYD. Now, the legacy automakers, they're going to come around and they're going to have one or two hits here and there that will take away from BYD sales eventually. That's number one. Number two, Chinese competition is going to also be exported. I just talked about the Xingyuan, the EX2, being locally produced in Brazil. Brazil's an emerging market, an important market for BYD. And if the EX2 is built locally, they're not going to have that market. They're not going to have free reign in that market.
Which reminds me of the other thing that I saw, and you tweeted this, that Magna would be open to producing in Canada with Chinese OEM customers. Only if it's long-term. This was Swami, their CEO, talked about it at an event earlier this week. So there's another wrinkle that's happening. And at least, I don't know how that works because Magna does not produce whole vehicles in Canada. They only have the Graz facility in Austria.
Well, that's the other thing to think about, Lei. Like, if BYD needs to accelerate production in order to try to achieve these goals, do they outsource some of their production? Not only for batteries, but for final assembly.
There's no precedent. I can't imagine BYD being built by Magna. I just feel like it's something that BYD don't normally do or never does. Somebody like an Xpeng, right? Or somebody like a GAC, yeah, sure. But yeah, I mean,
and we have to
possibilities.
We have to talk about all the possibilities. What if they acquired a struggling brand that had 1 million units in sales, or 1.2, 1.4 million? So that would be an immediate injection of sales volume for them. And so we have to think about that. There's acquisition possibilities. Because organic growth, if we look at the organic growth path, that is very, very capital intensive. And I guess my question to you, Lei, is how much control do we believe Wang Chuanfu is willing to let go of in order to achieve the sales volume that he's looking for to be the number one automaker in the world? Because in order to achieve that, he's either going to need to write many checks over several years. But we already see that if BYD sneezes, is really based heavily on their share price.
Yeah,
so
the answer is
if
not
you have
much.
11 million, I don't at this point in time, I think he also wants to maintain significant control of their trajectory.
But they're basically trying to repeat what Tesla did. The batteries, the flash charging stations, chickens or eggs ratings.
And the other thing too, that's a little bit out of their control, and this is probably why the flash charging investment into Europe is, what if adoption rates, because countries don't want to continue subsidizing EV purchase, what if adoption rates slow significantly? Now, does that mean they're plug-in hybrids sales spike over the next few years? Potentially, but I believe that there needs to be a balance between the hybrid sales and the BEV sales in order for them to get to number 3 or to number 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now,
that's the other significant thing is all of these other top global automakers, their ICE EV sales or hybrids at least account for a significant portion, whereas BYD, everything they're selling, 10 million units are NEVs. That's another pretty big hurdle to achieve, is they get to number one globally by selling all NEVs.
Well, I mean, Chery, Great Wall, the Geely, the other three large, selling in the millions of units per year. They do have a combination of ICE and NEV. So we saw Tesla's struggles. Now, BYD does also sell hybrids, but part of Tesla's strategy was incorrect. But let me summarize what I think, you think, and I think at a high level. Do we think it's impossible for BYD to become the number one automaker? I don't think 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, you and I would have been like, yeah, they can't do that. We believe they can, or I believe they can, and you tell me. I'll let you speak for yourself. 3 or 4 years ago, the political environment, the export environment, completely different. The domestic competition environment, completely different. So I was very bullish that they were going to become number one with a bullet. I'm not as bullish, but I still believe they can achieve number one status. I don't believe they can achieve number one status by 2030.
Yeah, I'd say probably 99% agree. I think the timeline is very interesting. Timeline is very interesting because he did say 2030. I think that's their target.
But you and I had heard that they were targeting 2030, and it just wasn't openly stated. But now that it has been openly, so anything that BYD does, anything and everything from a strategy standpoint, from this point forward, I'm looking through that lens of becoming the number one automaker in the world to analyze why they did what they did.
Yeah, there's not many more years. It's 2027 coming up, 3 more years, basically. Tough. It's going to be tough.
Because let's say they have 6 million units of capacity for production around the world. Let's say 6.5. And each factory that they need to open, let's say averages 250 to 300,000 units. So that means they have to open 10 more factories.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they want to supply 100% BYD batteries to those vehicles, they then need to open more battery factories.
Yeah.
And we know that the Chinese government doesn't really want more capacity being built in China. And if they build that capacity outside of China, they lose a lot of flexibility. And these decisions as to where, how much, becomes so much more important to them over the next few years. So you and I are going to scrutinize a lot of these decisions moving forward.
Yeah, regionally, they probably need to have production in all the major regions they sell, including the U.S. eventually.
So while you were talking, Lei, I did a quick Google search, and Gemini told me that Toyota's U.S. sales as a percentage of global is between 15 to 20%. So that is consistent with the 2 million units that if at 11 million, 2 million's just less than 20%. So
okay.
my Chabadul guess was pretty good, pretty accurate.
Okay. Yeah. Good benchmark.
Let me ask you this, your best guess, if they enter in 27, and let's say they have a factory built by end of 27, early 28, how long do you think it takes for them to, in the United States, to get to 1.5 million?
Well, first of all, 27, 28 sounds early. I'm thinking it'll be more.
I'm saying best case scenario.
Best case scenario, then early 2030s, probably. That's my kind of,
And that's like, if there aren't any significant issues and challenges, that's like best case, I think.
It is.
So you want to move to the GM and Power?
Let's talk about energy. GM and Ford are all in on energy. So, which is the event that you went earlier this week in San Francisco. Where the chief product officer talking about the energy part of the plans.
JB Strobel was on stage as well. Ex-Tesla CTO, co-founder, and current CEO, founder of Redwood Materials, whose company repurposes and recycles lithium-ion batteries.
And GM is a big partner because of the used battery packs that they're using for Redwood, right?
So a friend pointed out to me that one of the reasons that GM had this event was because a little bit of the FOMO that Ford received all this attention for. And so they had to also say, me too, we're doing this too. So let me set the stage. GM Empower was an event that updated everyone on what's happening with GM Energy, their newest division, or one of their newest divisions that focuses on energy storage, V2X, grid management,
V2G.
And charging. Yeah. And so Sterling Anderson, Chief Product Officer, as you mentioned, kind of introduced everyone. Kurt Kelty had a big part in it. And I recorded it. I will try to post it later next week with some captions because I don't know how good the sound was. The president of GM Energy, he also spoke. The biggest takeaways that I got from the event, and they were hosting at Fort Mason. And so they picked us up at the hotel. And only GM EVs. I was driven in an Escalade IQ, big truck. And so great event.
Neo ES9. Thank you, Neo ES9.
Yeah,
right?
I need to look at the dimensions because, if the ES9 is that big, that's big. But so my biggest takeaways effectively were sodium ion for ESS. They have partnered with a startup called Peak Energy. GM Ventures made a $30 million investment in Peak Energy. So they're partnering on development, but it sounds like GM will be manufacturing the sodium ion cells themselves. Kurt Kelty said they have a 3-pronged strategy. NMC for their top-end vehicles, LFP or LMR for their mass market mid-level vehicles, and then LFP for their more affordable vehicles. So that's their long-term strategy for clean energy vehicles or how they're going to power them. And one of the interesting things that Kurt had mentioned was that they're launching an app called Energy Pass that will create a seamless experience for charging across multiple charging platforms. So think EVgo, think Ayana. So he had shown like 5 or 6 charging providers, and this should have been done from day one. Consolidate that so you don't have 6, 7 apps. You're lucky You have Tesla, so you just basically go to Tesla superchargers. But when I had my Ioniq 5, I needed some regions of states have certain charging stations, and then you go across the state and they have other charging stations, and there's not one that allows you to just plug in and charge without downloading an app, without creating a new payment system. And it was really, really fun. So this promises to create a more seamless experience. But my question was, if you want to advocate for EVs and clean energy vehicles, you should open this app up to non-GM vehicles. Because currently, Energy Pass is only going to be available to GM vehicles. The other thing that was interesting is that every vehicle they ship effectively, every EV they ship is bidirectional. And so they brought in the PG&E CEO who talked about how they're partnering on the vehicle to grid stuff. But yeah, it was interesting. A lot of small details were still not kind of articulated. So there's a lot of meat that needs to be put on the bones to really execute on what they had announced during that event.
So one of the things I saw was this interface that GM is introducing in the app, where how the utilities or the companies could be connected. So what Tesla does well is I have this we have Eversource here, and it's connected through my vehicle, and I can see my charging sessions every month, every session. It's very seamless experience, which I'm not sure the legacies are offering at this point. It's not as easy, but Tesla makes it really easy. So yeah, that's something. And then just the peace of mind of charging. Why is BYD rolling all these in Europe? Because they believe the current European charging landscape is not enough to have that kind of the take rate from the consumers. Tesla has done it. That's why I'm very happy that I have a Tesla. There's no anxiety at all. Anywhere I go, however long the trip is, no other competitor can offer this kind of peace of mind. So BYD want to do it. NIO wants to do it. XPeng wants to do it. Li Auto wants to do it.
The other thing I'll add, Lei, about BYD investing in charging infrastructure in the EU is that not only is it a binary thing, there's not enough, full stop. And then number two, there's no guarantee that the current charging providers upgrade their systems to take full advantage of BYD's charging capabilities or charging speed. So the other part of that reason is that BYD is building the cutting edge, the fastest, ultra fast chargers into the EU so that it takes advantage of the BYD vehicles, 800 volt platforms or the fastest platform that they have is. And I think that's also an important reason they're investing heavily in the EU charging infrastructure. So,
yeah.
And they're not waiting. They're just not waiting for the government to do things for them, which the legacy automakers, they're always like, well, we can do this if you do this or if you help us. And it's just like, okay, then that's going to be your limiting factor. One of your huge limiting factors is waiting on governments to make investments. You lose a lot of control that way. And BYD, to our discussion earlier, they want to control everything. So it was a good event. One of the sidebar highlights, was I got to ride in a Zoox. I did that
finally
3 times. We had gone out on Monday night after all the events were over. And so we had been drinking. We get into a Zoox and ride around back to Soma from North Beach. It's a good experience.
Oh, you hailed it, right? Arranged? You hailed it? Or it was...
Just in Union Square, they have a Zoox house because I'm still on the wait list for the app to be activated. I'm going to go to Vegas and try to do one in Vegas.
Yeah. Took a while waiting for it.
But if you go to this Zoox house, they bypass the wait list and they will call you one and it picks you up right at the Zoox house on Union Square on Post, I want to say. And I waited 30 minutes. So I went to the Nike store and I bought a San Francisco Nike shirt. Came back. It was there. And then my friend, Sophia Tung, who writes the Ride AI Substack, she had a credit from Zoox. And so she called a Zoox at around 9 or 10 p.m. in North Shore, and it took us back to Soma. So they are doing it as like one-offs for media and analysts and things like that. But it's geofenced because a lot of the routes from the Zoox house will take you one way. It won't be round trip. They did have capability to do round trip, but it was much smaller ODD for round trip. And so
yeah, I mean,
it's
still
it,
limited.
But
I mean, in Vegas, it was
very limited.
Probably like a 2-mile thing from the strip up to the north of the strip. And
then, of course, Waymos are flying by flying by all over the place in San Francisco. So
speaking of, Waymo is launching their first ad today. I think you've seen some videos posted online. Interestingly,
yeah,
they're offering the premium $29.99 a month. I don't know about that, but only for the user who use it a lot, right? Maybe it's worth it, but not for every day, like me.
I tweeted, I was like, this is how you do subscription service. This is how you do subscription service, Legacy Auto. So
it's definitely a subscription-based life right now, right? Streaming, I don't have cable anymore. I have the FSD subscription. Everything is subscription nowadays.
I'm going to say something, man. I almost thought, because I couldn't tell what the colors were until just, like half an hour ago, but I almost thought you had a USA soccer jersey on.
This is the shirt I got from Volkswagen in Munich. It's their ID Polo camouflage. Jeez. So I thought, in the spirit of World Cup, I have to wear something colorful, as you are.
I'm repping the China EVs More.
Yeah. So speaking
Team
of World
USA
Cup, right?
plays tonight at 9 p.m. Yep. I'm looking forward to that.
Same here.
I love these global events.
Saying that speaking of World Cup, how this is related to China EVs, we have to find some connections. So one of the connections is BYD is the partner of RedNote, and Feng Chongbao and Denza are broadcasting partners for CGTN. That's how BYD is involved.
Yeah. Well, and Alibaba's involved, Lenovo's involved.
Lenovo,
for these events.
Hisense, Mengniu, there's a lot of Chinese brands. The balls, the chips. In the soccer balls, the chips, I think they're Chinese made. The joke is there's only one match referee from China, and there's Labubu from China. Those are the Chinese national team. That was the joke online. Yeah.
Because the Chinese national team did not make the World Cup. So
yeah.
That's all I have. Let me repeat. Congratulations, Lei, on episode number 250. I will pat myself and you on the back.
Same to you.
There's still a few listeners, live streamers, but I think we do really, really important work. And we haven't really done a great job of promoting this, but
I'm trying to figure something out because I mean, the utilities and the tools we have, it helps. So,
yeah, because I'd like to get us in front of more people, because I think what we've been doing for so long, 250 episodes for more than almost 5 years, it's going to be much more relevant to more people. And I think we're objectively some of the best truth tellers, good and bad. But hey, man, I wanted to give 30 seconds of reflection on episode 250. So
yeah,
congratulations, man.
Imagine just 4 years ago, the last time World Cup happened. I got COVID in November 2022 for the first time. And then how the market was then versus just 4 years later, how things change, the narratives change, the momentum, they could change any minute. We always have to look at this through a longer lens to really make a conclusion and judgment on what happen or how things will turn out.
I'm going to give you an assignment, man, because you're much better at it than I am. Like, maybe what you do is like episode 1 to episode 250, like do that compare and contrast you just did. The number one vehicle today, the sales volume today. Maybe you just record a quick video and we post it as like our marketing for episode 250.
It's just a classic one would be China exported 1 million vehicles for the longest time annually up until 2021. And now China exports close to 1 million vehicles per month in the last 2 months in a matter of 5 years.
And it's still growing. But before Tom H., greetings from Shanghai. SSJJ005. If NIO can't sell at least 10,000 a month of the new L60 from July, it's a failure considering the new lower price and all the features.
The
L60. He's harsh. You're harsh, man.
I mean, L60, the BAS pricing starting at 135,800 RMB is the same pricing as the Firefly. Not the BAS mode Firefly, but the regular price Firefly. So think about that.
Apreza writes, ICE car sales around 50% year over year. Down 50% year over year. Malcolm Bennett, 3555. Good morning, everyone. Just getting on. BYD announced flash charging in Canada. Do you believe this shall encourage all charging operators to follow, all EVs to upgrade? Let me start. I don't know if many charging operators have the budget. or the funds to upgrade, unfortunately. And there needs to be some sort of analysis that's being done unless BYD wants to fund the upgrades to charging infrastructure. Again, pointing back to Lei's comment, that could be their moat for all these markets. But is it necessary to have a 3-minute, 4-minute, 6-minute charger? I don't know. But so it could be overkill to upgrade every single charger in Canada just because BYD has done it. But Lei, what do you think?
No, I think this is where maybe the latecomers and, BYD, if I think of the ones at the forefront, right? So Tesla has done it. So BYD is trying to do it. NIO has established the power swap model. Other than that, there's a bunch of Chinese ones that are building out their own. But if you're talking about the traditional charging operator, they're just not as fast as BYDs are doing. Established or rollout is not just as fast. And then the earlier question about Onvo L60, the way to answer that is all of the 3 NIO brands needs to have at least one model, 10,000 units a month model. So NIO has done it. Onvo has not. At least, they have, but maybe for 1 or 2 months. Firefly, not yet. They're selling 5,000, 6,000 a month. But each brand needs to have a 10,000 unit a month model, I think, to be the next stage of kind of consistency. NIO already has 2. They're about to have 2. Onvo, I'm hoping L60 can be that one. So that's how I kind of look at it going forward.
Tom H., greetings from Shanghai. BYD can operate as the low-cost producer and value price their export production that will fuel their growth ambitions. Sure, but I also think that more countries will sound alarm bells that the Chinese are kind of dumping. Even if there's demand for their vehicles, they need to really, really be careful about looking like they're shipping excess capacity as opposed to shipping to accommodate demand.
But BYD is just trying as hard at home as they're trying to export, as they're trying overseas, because at home they just announced that fallback covering you for accidents in urban and that's a major. I think Xpeng has followed it somewhat. They're trying hard.
Have they?
Xpeng, I think, is a different. The fine print is different, but it's not like they're giving up the home market.
It is. When you think about how bold that guarantee is with fine print, it didn't catch in Western media that much, but they are really, really pushing out that line and are forcing a lot of companies to try to follow them. And a lot of companies just aren't going to be willing. What else does BYD do to separate itself? Because they're trying everything. And, there's good and bad to that, but we can talk about that in the next episode. Tom also writes, the higher margins on export sales to EU, CA will underwrite the expense of deploying charging infrastructure. You make a great point. But again, I think the ability to export is going to be limited moving forward. Number one, as countries become more aware of it and likely increase certain protectionism, and then also as BYD domestic production in those regions comes online, because then they'll need to export less, you would think. So
I think the rhythm of launches also is happening much faster. So BYD, their Big Tongue is launching, and they're about to launch the Big Han. Right, the Big Tongue has over 100,000. Da-Han. And then Volkswagen came out with the ID Era 8X. Li Xiang is about to launch the L8.
8 Series is the meat market, the sweet spot for.
So and
mass market and premium.
Volkswagen, especially the joint venture Shanghai Volkswagen, they haven't done well. But I think ID Era 9X was number 1 in the EREV in May rankings, like over 5,000 units. So there's some momentum, but we'll see how it goes. But the foreign automakers continue to lose share. The Hondas, right? The shareholders want to deal out, right?
Since you mentioned Honda, Lei, give a shout out to Nori. He had posted a Reuters article that he wrote about the Honda board trying to oust eBay.
Wanting to,
And it seems like the Western OEMs boards are tolerant of mediocrity. So last comment from Tom, BYD's export pricing will be higher than domestic. They can price just below their EU CA competitors to avoid dumping stigma. So, I look at dumping more as a volume thing than a price thing, because honestly, Tesla is now shipping, is it top end or mid end? Maybe top end Model 3s to Canada for $36,000. So that is a cheap Model 3 for, I think, dual motor. So they can point to Tesla being the one that starts that price war in Canada, at least. I'm not looking at BYD as an individual exporter. I'm looking at China EV Inc. as being the exporter and the concern from the large macro numbers, not the individual numbers from each individual brand. So anyways, we've been on this for an hour and 4 minutes, Lei. So we are going to figure out a way to celebrate our 250th episode. But for those that have
just like America
been
is
part
going
of this,
for its 250, right?
Yes, right. We're going to have a UFC fight in front yards. Anyway, for those of you that have been for a few episodes, for a lot of episodes, for most of the episodes, thank you. Thank you for spending your time with us. We do appreciate it and love all your feedback as well and your comments. So keep them coming. And Lei, I will talk with you on DMs. Have a good weekend. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Same to you, brother.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at Lei Xing 77. That's LEIXING 77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China EVs and more.